Hi, and welcome to Data Futurology. In this podcast, we unlock the secrets, tips, tricks, and mistakes of data science executives from around the world. With this, you can see what is possible, how things can be done well, how things can be done poorly sometimes with the mistakes being shared, and hopefully help guide your career and what you can do at your work. My name is Felipe Flores. I'm your host, and I'm a data science executive, so it's great to have conversations with my peers from around the world and get to pick their brain and share their stories. Today, got a fantastic guest. We're speaking with Adam Bonifield, and he is the VP of Artificial Intelligence at Airbus. He's currently based in France. He tells us about a huge team that he has built there, about 150 people. What they're doing there is phenomenal, applying AI to every corner of the business. In his journey to get there, he was a serial entrepreneur having 2 startups with big name investors. And he also worked in the US government, and he was one of the senior innovation fellows during the Obama administration. Before that, he was working with politicians to do fundraising online, and was the first to bring a platform that did that into the market. The guy's incredible. His trajectory is amazing. The results, I thought, really speak for themselves, and really humble, down to earth. Fantastic conversation. Lots to learn from this one, both from an entrepreneurship side, from managing corporates, and from a government perspective. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Here is Adam.
Adam, mate, how are you going? Thanks so much for making the time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
I'm keen to first ask you about your origin story into the world of data. How was it that you first got started? What was it that pulled you in? What are some of the memories of the early days of the world of data for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So for me, it's actually kind of a funny story because I never really thought of myself as a data scientist. I was a computer scientist at school, and I did some statistics in university, and other than that, I mean, I was really just interested in building stuff. And so it was actually through a political campaign. So originally, I started volunteering for this congressional candidate in New York, and I was obviously really into computers. I was really into digital, so I sort of saw that at the time, this was 15 years ago. There was no real digital operation. There was nothing like that yet. But it was right on the border, when that stuff started becoming relevant. And so at the time, I thought, I think we could actually get some people to donate to your campaign online, which was a crazy idea at the time. But well, why would they donate? They don't know who I am. They don't live here, And I said, well, yeah, but you have kind of a national profile. This was at the time where the Democrats were trying to take back the House, and so there's some movement to kind of get Democrats in elected. And so I started running some digital operations for him. And at the time, we didn't think we would really make any money. And very quickly, we were able to raise, I want to say, a few $100,000 at least. For a congressional candidate, that's a big deal. Yeah. And then I started building some data tech essentially to help maximize the amount of money we were raising. Number one, to make it a lot easier to donate, but then number two, to start targeting people online with asks that would be couched appropriately for them. And so we had this theory, and I say we because at the time I was allowed to hire some people because they were like, yeah, just bring in all your nerd friends to kind of help with this. We had a theory that we can raise a lot of money if we appropriately size the asks. And so we did a lot of experimentation around that, and we didn't know it at the time, but we were building essentially some of the first contextual targeting technology, certainly the first used in politics. And we ended up raising through this one campaign, several $1 million just by taking a data-driven approach to fundraising, but not just fundraising, also asking people to volunteer, asking people to sign up for newsletters and stuff like this. And so that experience eventually became my first entrepreneurial experience, which was this startup called Give2, where we essentially built a tool to do this at scale and released it to all of the major campaigns. And within that same election cycle, we were powering more than half of the congressional campaigns in the country, and eventually, licensing it to the Democrats and then also to the Republicans, and it became just a tool that was used to do online fundraising. So it was a special time because, and there are moments like this today as well, but not really, it wasn't really known what you can do with data if you were like a little bit creative. And it wasn't that complicated, there wasn't that complicated technology. It was just sort of deploying pretty old targeting techniques in a sort of novel way. It ended up, the Democrats did ultimately take the House. So, I mean, some of these digital tools ended up being the difference maker potentially in this massive political shift that happened at the time.
Yeah. Man, incredible. And how long did you work in or have Give2?
So that was about maybe I want to say 4 years. I mean, it was the business was very cyclical because obviously it was a political tool. Although eventually there were users like the RSPCA, United Way, big nonprofits as well, but all around that concept. And so then my entrepreneurial career continued. My partner and I, who were working on that, ended up founding another company called Spinnaker, which was a advanced analytics company, and sort of, I would say, if you could probably call it an AI company. I mean, it was it was an advanced, let's say, real-time analytics company that was basically just doing analytics in a different way. We sort of came to the realization that a lot of real-time analytics was sort of broken, that basically it imagined that there'd be this person behind a big dashboard, constantly checking to see what was going on. And like analytics had just moved on since then, that regular people were using analytics, were using real-time analytics. And so when they weren't the kinds of people who wanted all the knobs and dials, they wanted, or even had the time to really be constantly monitoring. And so a big focus of that company was, how can we change the paradigm such that, you don't need a data scientist to do this kind of work. So we built basically a series of different engines to sort of to make sense of some of these analytical insights, real-time analytical insights for regular people. So that was the premise of that company. And then, all in all, I think both companies took me all the way to, I don't know, they were like 10 years of labors of love, basically.
What type of things did you learn in that journey in finding and essentially tackling this huge problem space of why hasn't this been productized in a way that's more accessible? What were some of the things that you learned or that you found surprising in that journey?
You learn a lot about. I mean, I think at the time. So, for example, I'll say the first product that we built was just a web analytics product. So basically, first party product that you could use to make sense of your own web analytic data. And that was sort of the start of the company. And then we ended up building essentially integrations for larger other corporate partners, where we were essentially building the pretty real-time notification engine on top of their analytics.
Yeah.
And I think the big lesson we had, what was interesting is there already are established interfaces for how to make sense of analytic data, like visualizations. And even on top of that, Google Analytics has a paradigm, for example, for how you're going to interact with data. We had the realization of sort of this paradigm was built essentially for either data scientists or, I guess, data analysts. And this paradigm was essentially wrong if we're imagining that the average person isn't actually really doing any kind of configuration at all. They're just consuming things, and then they're taking other kinds of actions based on that. And so we knew that there was this new paradigm that's needed, but then we really didn't have any kind of like UI reference point for how to design that paradigm. And I think we probably made the mistake of sort of, at least with the first party product, imagining like very, very specific things that real people would want to do with that data. So maybe like, to give you a real example, you're being talked about on a message board. So the UI should just be, let somebody know what's happening, give them a few bits of information, and then immediately send them to that message board. So that's like the UI, and you can consume that in a lot of different ways. You can consume that on your phone, consume it in an email, or something like this. But that's not much of a UI, and in fact, like it's not that coherent. And I think there's still like a very big missing piece where it's like we need to build a new paradigm of like data storytelling and data visualizations built for regular people. In the same way that we have a kind of philosophical approach to data analysts, we need a sort of something equivalent and something new. And you see it happening. I mean, I think you see a lot of data storytelling and data journalism that's increasingly standardized and feels the same.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's just like a lot. I mean, you know, I would love to see people who really care about this really think seriously about what should the future of this kind of data storytelling, data consumption look like if we're imagining that powerful analytical tools are really going to be consumed by just regular people who have a completely different mindset to consuming it. And so this is the big problem that I think still remains unsolved, that because these tools tend to be built by nerds who really want to, who are sort of power users. And a lot of times big startups, actually, the first users are these people. They're kind of like bad customers because they give the wrong feedback. We need to think more seriously about, you know, and there are companies doing this, obviously, but it's still a massive growth area, I think.
Oh man, like I could not agree more. Shit. But do you think that data journalism goes on top of or as part of a real-time notification engine that does the analysis for you? So that's sort of like the two worlds that I would be very keen to see come together. And in the past, in some of my jobs in finance, I used to work in finance, and now I'm in healthcare. But in finance, we ventured out down very similar paths to you in the sense of real-time notification engines, and we wanted to do it on companies' financials. And behind the scenes, we did all the analysis that would typically go into dashboarding, but then we ended up giving people a feed, almost like a Facebook feed, which each tile was an independent individual insight that they could consume. And then how that insight was presented was posing a challenge for us. And we at the beginning started with things like, we saw a trend broken. So we had 12 months of revenue being in this band, and now it's above or below that band. And like quite sort of simple things that are not the way that people generally think about consuming this type of information. But I was also like searching for very similar ways. So curious to know whether you're still combining or thinking that these two could be combined, like a real-time notification engine with some insights and the data journalism side.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept of them moving into journalism is at least a step forward from that like widgetized dashboard UI concept. And it's like, and I think that that's basically state of the art in terms of visualization, to say like, okay, if we could simplify, the UI to at least give these bite-sized nuggets of insights, and then just like present them in a sort of semi-structured way in the dashboard, that's valuable. But again, like I still think that that's not that great. I mean, it's kind of like imagining, like, you're kind of trying to write a story, or you're trying to sort of write a paper, and you just got a bunch of ideas and you're sort of like throwing them all on a whiteboard and saying like, okay, that's what we got. So that's not that great. But that is sort of state of the art today, so and I think at least the concept of journalism, which is to sort of take these nuggets and then organize them in a story, that's that's closer, I think, to how, again, regular people like to consume stuff. Um, and so so to me, that's sort of, yeah, I guess I could say that that's like the bleeding edge of how to present this. But then most companies, of course, don't really take that journalistic approach to data. And I can tell you that's not how, at Airbus, which is, my world now, right now, data-driven decision making will, sort of save the entire industry. And yet, we still do what you do, the sort of dashboard for executive decision makers. So so it's still, I think, an unsolved problem. It's still, I think that, to me, that's an example of where we need to go, or at least we need to come up with a more prescriptive, more sensible way, because the model of imagining somebody in a sort of crisis center with a big board on top of them, like looking at numbers going up and down, kind of like, as you were saying in finance, I just don't think that's really how people are making decisions. You need something that fits much more to how decisions are actually made, which is like in a meeting, like after a presentation, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yep, agreed. And how was it working with the guys at Andreessen Horowitz? I know that obviously you had other investors as well, and if you can tell us a little bit about the VC and entrepreneur relationship as part of that.
Yeah, so so it was really terrific. At the time, I mean, we were I think the first seed investment they made. So we were in kind of like
Right.
an interesting category. I mean, apart from Y Combinator, that's funded by A16Z, but just from the fund itself. And now they have a seed program. It's an interesting place, because we weren't from that far away. We were in Washington D.C. at the time, and we moved out to California, and so there was a little bit of sort of like celebrity shock.
Yeah.
We went to Sand Hill Road, and I remember sitting in the lobby, and the lobby room, it's just almost like it's designed to be like a bit of a California cool like library, but also waiting room. And they told me that we were kind of looking at all the books. They said this room is an exact replica of Marc Andreessen, or I think either one of the two, one of their personal libraries. So when they buy a book, they buy two books. One book they put in the personal library, one book they put here. So this is kind of like a window into their intellectual, interests. And it's just like I've never had such an experience where I was like, what? It's almost like, these people have, more money than God, right? So it's just kind of, so obviously they would have two giant libraries. And
which were exactly the same.
Right. They're both the same. And so anyone waiting to meet with them would get a view into their mind through their library. So I thought that was quite cool. I mean, there's 100 things like this where, you have, there's like weird shit that you'd only see in like a video game or a movie. I remember when we first started, we were brought in by 500 startups, so we were part of this incubator. Now, 500 startups has now made 5,000 investments. At the time, we were like their 100th investment. So we were part of like the second batch of companies that they made. So Dave McClure, who is started the fund. I remember he gave a speech to us, and he was a bit of a celebrity in his own right. Now he's a celebrity for various reasons. So he made this speech saying, "Look, I don't care what you do. I don't care who you are. You're kind of, just kind of like pawns to me. But that's okay. Because the good part about that is you can do whatever the fuck you want." And he was like, "The only thing I don't want you to do is just don't write on the windows. Like, this is a very expensive office. It was like the top floor of the tallest building in Mountain View. He was like, just don't write on the windows. Do whatever the fuck you want otherwise." And then he thought about it, And he said, you know what? Actually, if you're making enough money, we'll get new windows right on the windows. And to me, I always think about that because it was like very much the spirit of the time, where it was like just
Yeah.
like there were no rules, and if you're successful, you could kind of like make your rules. And that was a really great, that was a great feeling. That was a really amazing thing that our investors left us with, which is to say, like,
Mm,
usually you have bosses, and your bosses are essentially saying this is the right way and wrong way to do your job. And
mm.
it was really nice to have investors instead of bosses, because they're the ones saying to you, like, there is no right way, or we don't know what the right way is. We just are betting on you. And really, this is quite transactional. The bet, if it pays off, will be your best friend. And so just let us know what we need to do to help you make the bet pay off.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's I actually think if you're an entrepreneurial person, that's like a nice relationship. And actually, you can have that, I think. I'm curious about your experience, but I think you can have that in a corporate relationship as well, where you have more like investors and sponsors who are really letting you do your thing and empowering you. And I think, getting a taste of that earlier in your career can be really nice.
Very nice, and it's definitely something that I've seeked and really, yeah, really strive to make it a part of my corporate career, to have that relationship of yeah, of somebody that is very hands off. Like I've had bosses that are very hands off, let you do your thing. Definitely like there to help if you want, and definitely like ride on your successes. Um, but overall pretty chilled and kind of like best. Go forth
Yeah,
and do. But man, that's amazing that you're with like Mark Andreessen, Horowitz, Dave McClure. Like that's awesome. Like you're part of the that time of Silicon Valley, and we were many people like myself were looking at it from the distance and watching stuff on YouTube or getting to see like Dave when he comes to Australia and stuff like that. But you were right there in the mix in the second batch of 500 startups. Amazing, um, really amazing. And tell me about your time at Airbus and how did you decide to move from White House to Airbus? How did you end up in Airbus, and how's it been so far?
well, so that's a long story. But to summarize, I mean, Airbus is like truly. I mean, I had colleagues essentially who were working there. I knew the CTO at the time, and so I was thinking about moving. I mean, my partner and I were thinking about moving abroad anyway. So it's a very special company, I should say. And I think, and this is maybe helpful advice to anyone who's like thinking about making that jump into sort of like a corporate setting. I think what makes it very special, at least what made it work for me, is number one, just being in love with the product. So like, I mean, I was the kid who went to the Air and Space Museum every week,
Right.
from when I was a little kid. So I was just in love with aircrafts. I mean, and by the way, if you work for a company with a really terrific product, or it's just a very specialized product, you're surrounded by people who I can only describe it as have a patriotic feeling about what they do. And I remember going to the final assembly line for the first time, and
Yeah.
you see basically this half assembled uh, aircraft. So you can really see the complexity of the millions of different parts that go into creating it. And you get people. The person who was giving me the tour, who was like a friend of mine, was almost like feeling emotional describing what it takes to bring this thing into life. And it's a nice place to be when people feel so emotionally passionate about what they do. It's
Yes.
a very beautiful thing. And then I think, especially if you're interested in data technology, and I think the same is true in finance and healthcare, I think, which is your fields, but if working in an environment with many different applied problems, where the applied problems involve a tremendous amount of complexity, it's
Mm.
just like a terrific place to be. I mean, it's truly just like a playground. So in the case of Airbus, I mean, we have a satellite division, well, I should say a defense and space division. We have a division, a helicopters division, and a commercial division. And then obviously within commercial, there's so many different subproblems in AI. Like there's the, autonomous flight, the sort of thing probably everyone thinks of. But actually, like the vast majority of use cases are just related to industrial manufacturing and logistics and engineering, and, and all the support functions. And so basically, like if you're working in data science, more or less, like I would just really look for companies with very, very complex applied problems, because you will never be bored. And I could say for our team, I mean, they're really like, I have to say this is, it's funny because my Airbus team is like one of the most professionally happy teams I've ever been a part of, because we're just working on a new interesting problem every day, and they're all unsolved problems. So it's just like an amazingly fascinating thing. And then I should also say, where to the extent they're unsolved problems, a lot of this solving it involves advancing the state of the art. So
yes,
like where you're doing essentially research, or maybe like downstream research, I should say, because we also have a research team. But where you're doing research only because you have to in order to solve the problem that you're working on. And it grounds you very much in the data science problem, because you have like a real use case that you're working on. It's not purely an intellectual use case. And that's a very, very good environment to work in, because you really can feel pulled forward by the special problems, for example, in AI that you're working on. And there's tons of examples of them where, our team has logged new patents or presented, new research findings that have advanced the state of the art. So that's a very special thing. That's very, very, very special. And
that's amazing.
Very different from working in the U.S. government. I mean, the U.S. government the U.S. government is maybe like 10 to 15 years behind the private sector. So it has a lot of really important problems to solve. But in terms of like hard data science problems, or like just hard technology problems, I would say working in these applied settings, you really are hitting the hardest problems. And even the largest tech companies in the world will come to Airbus for help solving these problems, because in a corporate setting, you have access to all the data, you have the use cases, you have the customer needs. So this is really, in my opinion, this is really where the state of the art is being advanced.
Amazing. And I think that's awesome advice. That is fantastic advice. And tell me, this 150 people in the team, obviously quite a broad team. How are they organized? What are some of the sub teams? And if you can describe some of the work processes, what is top of the structure and workflow, how the team tackles all these challenges ongoing?
Okay, so basically there's, I would say if I were going to talk about the split, they would be split between, I would say a core data science team and sort of like early stage delivery team, which is like on the earlier side of the project lifecycle. And then I would call it maybe like an IT team to be simplified, where it's like they're really working on scaling, industrializing, securing anything that comes out of this other team. So in terms of the former team, so the original team was basically all data science profiles. And the reason why we built it that way was that, in the early stages, we were basically just prototyping stuff. And I don't think we really even had the luxury to think about how to deploy these projects at scale, because we were solving like the earliest stage problems of just kind of like, what does it even look like to do a data project in Airbus? And fortunately, fortunately for me, there were people that came before me that built essentially this massive data platform called Skywise, where it's become essentially a hub of collecting all the data assets in our broader space. So Airbus has led this sort of generational project in collecting tons and tons of data from suppliers, from airlines, from us as the OEM, the people making the machines. and so that basically meant that, like, if you're working in AI, it's the best place to be, right? Because you're solving the problem that basically every other organization has, which is just not being able to access enough data. So we had the data, but we just didn't really know how to deploy it. So we had a bunch of data scientists that were like working out of Jupyter notebooks and just like playing around with problems.
Yeah.
And then as we became more successful, we were able to grow more structure within the team. So we basically started onboarding a bunch of, I would say, more like computer science profiles, more more product manager profiles, more BD profiles, which actually is secretly like quite an important role, because there's a lot of work just to be done in scoping a problem appropriately and doing design thinking work to understand how to build it. So then that allowed us to move from sort of doing what I would call like early stage MVPs or sort of late stage proofs of concept into more like proper products, where we would think seriously about not just how to solve an individual problem, but how to grow a product that would essentially live and breathe with the with the sort of parts of the company that it was designed for. And so this is
and what was the difference between the product owner and the BD?
I would say like a product manager is someone quite technical who's really owning the overall life cycle of like a very serious product. So to give you, I can give you a real life example. I'm trying to think of one that would be easy to explain. So for example, computer vision, shop floor computer vision. So computer vision is a massive topic, and we start off with the ambition of we want to bring this into a shop floor environment, but it's not like a plug and play problem to solve, especially in Airbus, where the manufacturing environment is so complex, where it's not like in some companies the way you'd use computer vision is you would like have like a little part moving across a line, and you just like look for defects in it using cameras as your sensor. That's like a highly structured, a much more narrowly solvable problem than in Airbus, when you have like, if you can imagine, as I explained, this final assembly line, people walking around the shop floor environment, and obviously all the sensitivities involved in that, where we don't really want to collect any personal data around people. We just kind of want to understand what's happening in the manufacturing process. Like, that's a much more complex space, and the techniques you need in terms of understanding the actions and objects and equipment that is moving through, it's just much more dynamic. So that's a case where like you really need somebody with a deep technical background to design that overall product lifecycle and be the person making the technical decisions around road mapping it. And so, but then at the same time, you also have a very complex stakeholder network, and somebody needs to manage those relationships as well. So that's how I would describe the difference. And both are technical jobs, but one is much more of a stakeholder management role. One is much more of a technical role.
Yeah, excellent. So then you're starting to build out that part of the team. So you're sort of taking us on the journey, starting with the core data scientist to then this side of the team. And then I think
we ended up actually reinvesting in the data science side and recruiting much more specialists in specific domain areas. We sort of made the decision to really focus on a few different sort of AI, applied AI domain problems, and recruit specialists who essentially became experts using Airbus lingo in these different applied problems. And essentially these people took on board long-term kind of, I would say, downstream research, but maybe you could just say long-term AI development areas to take responsibility for, whether it's kind of related to techniques in using knowledge graph to understand some of the domain-specific knowledge graph problems we have, or I would say NLP problems we have, to computer vision, to anomaly detection, to conversational assistance. I mean, there's many different problems where Airbus has very specific applied states of the art that need to be advanced. So that's another component of the team. And then finally, once we started making some progress in some of these places, we started seeing opportunities to sort of create platforms that would open up a lot of the breakthroughs we made to the rest of the company. So if you have these thousands of analysts, a lot of them are actually quite upskilled and could, have actually joined our team. So there are people who have gone through our upskilling program that have then ended up joining the central team, which is quite a cool thing. But then a lot of the times they stay within their function and they're sort of embedded solving data science problems within their domains. And so for us, the challenge is often, these people have been upskilled, but there's sometimes also a challenge in downskilling the problems they have to solve. So, these people don't need to be experts in NLP. They maybe need to be experts in applying NLP libraries to solve their problems, or, using an anomaly detection platform to detect anomalies in, for example, flight test data. So these are things that we can build that can sort of at scale give kind of like technical tools to upskill people to solve data related problems. And this is another big component of our team. So there's a bit of this evolution. So we started with these early stage proofs of concept to moving towards like projects that we would deliver that had a pretty narrow scope, to then moving into these like massive products and platforms that are really, the things creating value at scale. And you've seen this sort of exponential growth in the amount of financial value, let's say, that we were able to return to the company just from doing this kind of work. And I should say as well, like I think a lot of organizations make the mistake of too heavily leaning on outsiders, like external partners, to do a lot of projects for them. And I think one of the risks of doing that too much, at least, is that you never actually then build these homegrown competencies. And at least in our case, this is where we've seen all of the value. Not all, but the vast majority of value come from going on the journey and then realizing, hey, there's this thing that there's nobody in the market building it. There's nobody worrying about it. It's just a problem that we've encountered. And if you have people inside your company whose job it is to figure out how to deliver it, they're gonna be the ones who discover it, and they're gonna be the ones who kind of help at least build the first version of the solution to it.
Amazing. That's incredible. That's incredible. I could keep asking you questions for ages, man. This is super, super interesting. I just had a look at the time. I am going to be respectful of your time. And so, man, I will leave it there for now. This has been absolutely amazing. And thanks so much for coming on the show. Do you have any sort of final thoughts or anything that you wanted to wrap us up with?
No, like I feel like I've been talking the whole time. I'm actually really curious to hear about your situation. But yeah, another time, over beers, proper beers.
I love it.
But no, thank you so much for taking the time. I hope it was helpful.
Super helpful.
And yeah, I think my parting thought is just, we are really truly living in a historically important moment where all of these new analytical techniques are being brought into the world. And I think we've talked a little bit about historically those moments, and I think we're living through one right now, especially in AI, where we're just starting to penetrate some of these applied problems. And I think for people who are listening to this podcast, I really would encourage you to be super creative, super open-minded about how to apply them, and to feel free to reach out to people like me who are, currently in corporate settings or whatever, and just ping your ideas off of people, because I think we're really kind of in the Wild West, and there's a moment right now we're living through where really cool ideas have the power to kind of revolutionize the state of the art that we're currently in. So we should take advantage of that. We're very lucky to be here, and yeah, I'm glad that you're also fighting the good fight.
Man, excellent note to end on.
That brings this episode to conclusion. Thank you so much for listening. Please find us on datafuturology.com or on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram as Data Futurology. Also go to datafuturology.com/podcast to find the show notes for this and any other episodes. If you liked this episode, it would mean a lot to us if you could leave us a review wherever you listen to our podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it was helpful and valuable for you. Thanks again, and see you next time.